What would you do if the company you built for 10 months betrayed you and fired you right in front of a $200 million deal? Would you walk away or secretly plan to turn the tables? I still remember that morning vividly. Sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of the 27th floor conference room, casting a golden glow over the polished table. I stood there, staring down at the chaotic rush of cars below, whispering to myself, if everything goes right today, 10 months of relentless effort will finally pay off. 10 months, nearly a year of my life poured into this deal. 10 months of sleepless nights, endless proposals, late-night calls across time zones, and countless flights to Shanghai and Beijing, only to return to New York utterly exhausted but unwilling to give up. My name is Olivia Tran, Director of Business Development at TechSphere, a mid-sized tech company with global ambitions. Out of everyone in the company, I'm the only one fluent in Mandarin and deeply familiar with Asian business culture. That made me the sole bridge to DragonGate, a massive Chinese tech conglomerate. The deal we were about to close was worth $200 million, a number that could change TechSphere's future, and mine along with it. But DragonGate wasn't easy to win over. Trust had to be earned step by step. I spent months carefully nurturing this relationship. Every dinner, every handshake, every gesture of cultural respect was deliberate and precise. There were nights when I nearly collapsed at my desk, but the vision of TechSphere finally breaking into the global market kept me going. That morning, everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. The final contract was ready, the terms agreed upon, and DragonGate was prepared to sign. It felt like this was my moment, the day I would finally secure my place and prove to the world that TechSphere belonged on the international stage. What I didn't know was that, as I closed my laptop and took a deep breath, a storm was already brewing behind the scenes, one that would soon sweep everything away. As I left the conference room to head down and greet the DragonGate delegation, a familiar figure caught my eye at the end of the hallway. Ethan Cole, TechSphere's newly appointed vice president, stood leaning casually against the railing, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. He gave me a thin smile, polite on the surface, yet somehow concealing something I could never quite read. Ethan had only been with TechSphere for 3 months, but he had already managed to capture the board's attention. Coming from a major Silicon Valley tech firm, he was known for his bold, sometimes ruthless decision-making style. At first, I'd hoped he might be an ally in our international expansion, but after just a few meetings, it became painfully clear how fundamentally different we were. I believed in building trust, especially when it came to foreign partners. Ethan, on the other hand, saw deals as nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet. Relationships, cultural nuances, respect. None of it mattered to him. Just last week, during a strategy meeting, I had been explaining the importance of certain cultural rituals during the signing ceremony. Ethan had merely shrugged and said coldly, "They need us more than we need them." The room had fallen silent after that, an unspoken tension filling the space. This morning, as I passed by him, Ethan tilted his head slightly, his voice smooth but laced with something sharper beneath the surface. "Let's hope everything goes exactly according to your plan." I froze for just a moment, hearing the challenge hidden between his words. Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving only the bitter scent of coffee and a gnawing unease curling in the pit of my stomach. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. Today was supposed to be the most important day of my career. Yet deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm brewing behind the scenes was about to break wide open. The main lobby of TechSphere was brightly lit that morning, every detail carefully arranged to welcome the DragonGate delegation. I had personally overseen everything, from the type of tea being served to the exact seating arrangement, meticulously aligned with Chinese customs. When the glass doors slid open, I stepped forward with a confident smile, my heart pounding but steady. This was the moment we had been working toward for 10 long months. At first, everything flowed smoothly. I guided the discussion in Mandarin, presenting the final terms with respect and clarity. I could feel the positive energy in the room, see the subtle nods of approval from Liang Wei, DragonGate's formidable CEO. Relief began to wash over me, and for a brief moment, I dared to believe that this deal was finally within reach, until Ethan walked into the room. Without so much as a warning, Ethan slipped into the chair directly across from Liang Wei, his sharp, calculated smile cutting through the air. He waited for me to finish my sentence before speaking in a smooth, confident tone. Actually, TechSphere has been considering a different model of partnership, one that would be far more efficient. My stomach dropped. Everything Ethan proposed was completely at odds with the strategy DragonGate and I had spent months refining. I saw confusion ripple through the delegation as they exchanged uneasy glances. Liang Wei's expression hardened, his voice edged with frost. So, who truly represents TechSphere in this negotiation? The room fell into a suffocating silence. I forced myself to breathe deeply, to stay composed. With a calm, measured smile, I carefully redirected the conversation, explaining that Ethan's ideas were merely suggestions, while the original plan remained the foundation of our partnership. After several tense minutes, the atmosphere began to settle, but I knew I had just saved a sinking ship by the thinnest margin. As the meeting finally adjourned, I glanced at Ethan. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The slight curl of his lips said it all. This was only the first round, and he was just getting started. By the time I left the building that evening, my head was pounding. The day had been a whirlwind of polite smiles and silent battles. I had managed to salvage the meeting, but DragonGate's confidence had been shaken, and so had mine. I could still see the flicker of doubt in Liang Wei's eyes as he shook my hand goodbye. It became painfully clear to me that if I relied solely on the official channels within TechSphere, Ethan would destroy everything I had built. He wasn't just challenging me, he was systematically undermining me piece by piece. So I decided to do something I had never done before: create my own plan B. Quietly, carefully, I began reaching out to a few trusted contacts within DragonGate. Nothing formal, nothing that could raise suspicion. Just subtle gestures to keep a direct line open in case the deal completely collapsed. That night, while reviewing the day's notes, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar notification. At first, I thought it was just another late-night email, but when I opened it, my breath caught. It wasn't an email. It was a text message from an unknown number. Be careful. The next meeting won't go the way you expect. I froze, reading the words again and again. My heart pounded in my chest. Who would send me something like this? Was it someone inside DragonGate warning me? Or perhaps someone within TechSphere trying to manipulate me? I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone down. There was no way to know. The following morning, Ethan was everywhere, commanding conversations, winning over board members with slick promises and carefully chosen words. I watched as the balance of power slowly shifted toward him, feeling the walls close in. Later that night, exhausted, I shut my laptop with trembling hands. Just as I reached for a glass of water, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the same anonymous number. This one was even shorter, even colder. Tomorrow, everything changes. I sat in the dim light of my apartment, staring at the screen, knowing in my gut that whatever storm was coming, it would hit with full force. The next morning, I landed in Shanghai with a mixture of nerves and determination swirling inside me. The anonymous message from the night before. Tomorrow, everything changes. Still echoed in my mind, but I forced myself to focus. This was it, the culmination of 10 relentless months of work. As the elevator doors opened to DragonGate's towering headquarters, I was greeted by the familiar sight of sleek marble floors and walls adorned with calligraphy. The building exuded both power and tradition, a reflection of the company itself. I straightened my blazer and followed the assistant who guided us to the top-floor conference room. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with quiet intensity. Liang Wei, DragonGate's commanding CEO, rose to greet me personally. His firm handshake and warm words in Mandarin gave me a sense of calm. "Olivia," he said with a nod. "Today, we make history." I smiled, replying in fluent Mandarin. "Yes, and I am honored to be here to see it through." I took my seat at the head of the table, carefully laying out my notes. Around me, TechSphere's team settled in, with Ethan taking a chair a few seats down. To my surprise, he seemed unusually composed, calm even. No smirks, no interruptions, none of the open defiance he'd shown before. For the first hour, the negotiations unfolded exactly as I'd envisioned. I outlined our shared vision, bridging gaps with precision and respect. DragonGate's executives responded with enthusiasm, their voices carrying an undertone of excitement. Liang Wei himself leaned forward, clearly invested. Every so often, I caught Ethan's expression out of the corner of my eye, neutral. Still, as if he were simply an observer. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a sliver of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, he'd finally decided to support the deal rather than sabotage it. When Liang Wei paused to speak, his voice was deliberate, thoughtful. "TechSphere has shown us trust and understanding," he said. "I believe this partnership will be prosperous for both sides." His eyes met mine, and for a moment, pride swelled in my chest. But then, something flickered across his gaze. A fleeting shadow, a subtle hesitation I couldn't quite name. My breath caught as unease crept in. It was almost as if Liang Wei sensed a shift in the room that I hadn't noticed yet. And in that fragile silence, I felt the first faint tremor of a storm about to break. For a brief, fleeting moment, everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. Liang Wei's tone had been warm, the DragonGate team engaged, their enthusiasm unmistakable. I allowed myself to exhale, to believe that maybe, just maybe, we had overcome the chaos Ethan had caused back in New York. And then Ethan stood up. The scrape of his chair against the polished floor was like a blade slicing through the room. Conversations halted. Liang Wei's brow furrowed in confusion as every pair of eyes turned toward him. Ethan straightened his suit jacket, his expression calm, almost serene, the way a predator looks right before striking. "In light of recent internal evaluations," Ethan announced smoothly, "TechSphere has decided to take a different direction. Effective immediately, Olivia Tran is no longer authorized to represent this company. She has been relieved of her position." For a second, I couldn't process his words. The air seemed to vanish from my lungs. "What?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. Ethan didn't even glance at me. He simply slid a folder across the table toward Liang Wei. "This is the updated proposal, prepared under my direction. We believe this approach is far more beneficial for both parties." Liang Wei's face darkened. His hands remained perfectly still on the table, but his voice carried a cutting edge. "Mr. Cole, this is highly irregular. We have been negotiating with Ms. Tran for nearly a year. To dismiss her, here, now, is a grave insult to DragonGate." I tried to speak, to explain, but Ethan cut me off with a raised hand, his tone sharp. "Olivia's methods were misguided. I'm here to correct them." The room erupted in Mandarin as DragonGate executives exchanged heated words. Liang Wei stood abruptly, his chair toppling backward with a loud crack. "This meeting is over," he declared, his voice echoing like a gavel. "DragonGate does not work with those who dishonor their commitments." Before I could move, before I could plead, he turned and walked out, his entire team following without a backward glance. The door slammed shut, leaving a deafening silence. I stood there, rooted to the spot, surrounded by TechSphere executives who suddenly wouldn't meet my eyes. Ethan finally looked at me then, his smirk razor sharp. And just like that, everything I had built, 10 months of sacrifice, trust, and hope, shattered in an instant. I don't remember how I made it out of that building. The last thing I saw was the heavy conference room door swinging shut as DragonGate's delegation disappeared down the hall. My legs carried me somehow, but my mind was blank, numb. The city outside was buzzing with life, yet to me, it felt like a void. Back at my hotel room, I collapsed into a chair and stared at my reflection in the dark window. My hands were trembling. In less than 10 minutes, Ethan had destroyed everything I had spent 10 months building. My reputation, my relationship with DragonGate, my future at TechSphere, all of it, gone, like sand slipping through my fingers. The flight back to New York was scheduled for the next morning. I packed in silence, feeling like a ghost moving through someone else's life. As dawn approached, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. For a split second, I thought it was another cruel message like before, but it wasn't a message. It was a call. "Olivia?" a familiar voice said when I answered, calm but firm. It was Liang Wei. We need to speak. Privately. My heart skipped. Within the hour, I was in a quiet tea house tucked away from the city noise. Liang Wei was already there, waiting with an expression I couldn't read. He gestured for me to sit. I will be direct, he began, his Mandarin clipped and precise. I do not trust TechSphere. What happened yesterday confirmed my fears. But, he paused, leaning slightly forward. I do trust you. I blinked, unsure I'd heard him correctly. For nearly a year, you have shown DragonGate respect and commitment, Liang Wei continued. That cannot be faked. TechSphere, however, is clearly divided. I will not risk my company's future on internal chaos. My breath caught as he slid a simple white business card across the table. If you are willing to stand on your own, he said, his voice low and deliberate, call me. This time, we deal directly, with no TechSphere in between. I stared at the card, the black letters blurring through the tears welling in my eyes. A lifeline, a chance to fight back. When I finally looked up, Liang Wei's gaze was steady, resolute. I closed my fist around the card, a fragile spark of determination igniting within me. For the first time since yesterday, I felt a glimmer of hope. The flight back to New York felt endless. I sat by the window, staring blankly at the clouds, clutching Liang Wei's card like it was the only thing keeping me from drowning. I replayed his words over and over in my mind. Stand on your own. When the plane landed, reality hit me like a cold wave. My access to TechSphere's systems had been revoked. My company email, my ID badge, everything that had tied me to the life I'd built was gone. The news of my public dismissal had already spread through the industry. By the time I got home, my phone was flooded with messages, pity from a few friends, gossip from rivals, and silence from almost everyone else. For 2 days, I barely left my apartment. I didn't eat much. I didn't sleep. I kept thinking of that conference room, of Ethan's smug expression as he stripped me of my identity in front of everyone. But on the third morning, as sunlight streamed through the blinds, I forced myself to stand. Ethan wanted me erased, humiliated, forgotten. If I disappeared now, he would win completely. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. I took every cent of my savings, even liquidated a small retirement account, and used it to form a new company, Nova Consulting. It was little more than a name and a rented office space downtown, but to me, it was a declaration of war. Over the next week, I worked in secret, reaching out to Liang Wei through a secure channel. Our conversations were cautious, deliberate. He laid out his vision for a partnership, one where trust, not corporate politics, would dictate strategy. Finally, under the cover of night, I met Liang Wei and his senior team at a discreet hotel suite. There were no grand speeches, no press releases, just a firm handshake and a signed agreement. In that moment, Nova Consulting became the official partner of DragonGate, taking the very deal TechSphere had lost. As we sealed the documents, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored wall. I didn't look like the woman who'd been humiliated in Shanghai. I looked like someone reborn. Later, back at my tiny new office, I placed the freshly printed Nova Consulting plaque on the door. My hand lingered on it, my heart pounding with renewed purpose. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning, and this time, I wasn't playing defense. In the weeks that followed, Nova Consulting came to life in a way that felt almost unreal. Our office was small, just 3 rooms above a quiet cafe downtown, but it pulsed with an energy that I hadn't felt in months. There were only 5 of us at first. Me, 2 trusted former colleagues who'd left TechSphere after seeing what Ethan did, and 2 young analysts eager to prove themselves. Our strategy was simple but precise. Move quietly, strike surgically. I started with relationships I'd built over the past 10 months, partners and clients who had trusted me long before Ethan's coup. One by one, I reached out to them, never openly pitching Nova, just listening to their frustrations with TechSphere. When they mentioned delayed responses, rising costs, or the chaos of new leadership, I carefully planted a seed. If you ever need a more agile, reliable partner, I'd say, my voice calm and steady, you know where to find me. The beauty of it was that none of these conversations seemed like a betrayal. It was simply me being there for people I'd nurtured relationships with for nearly a year. And when Nova's official proposal arrived on their desks, with terms better than anything TechSphere could offer, They didn't hesitate. Each new contract was handled in secrecy. No press releases, no social media posts. Liang Wei and DragonGate were crucial allies in this phase, quietly vouching for Nova's reliability to their network without ever mentioning TechSphere by name. By the end of the first month, 3 mid-sized clients had already shifted their business to us. By the second month, 2 of TechSphere's top-tier accounts followed suit. One evening, as the office lights cast long shadows across our modest desks, I stood before a whiteboard covered with charts and client names. The numbers told a story TechSphere didn't yet see. Their foundation was crumbling, piece by piece. I knew Ethan would notice soon. When he did, he would come for me with everything he had, but I wasn't afraid. For the first time since Shanghai, I felt in control, not as a victim of his betrayal, but as the architect of his undoing. At first, TechSphere didn't notice the losses. A single client leaving could be brushed off as bad luck or market fluctuation. But as the weeks passed, the numbers began to add up. Subtle at first, a few delayed payments, smaller purchase orders. Then, a sharp drop in quarterly revenue projections. Inside TechSphere's headquarters, tension thickened like storm clouds. I knew this only through whispers and secondhand reports, but I could picture it clearly. Board members demanding answers, department heads snapping at each other in late-night meetings. The once smooth machine that I had helped build was grinding itself apart. Ethan, of course, was at the center of it all. From what my contacts told me, he stormed through the halls like a man possessed, his confidence eroding with every lost deal. He tried everything: new incentives, flashy presentations, even aggressive discounting. But none of it worked. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about trust. Clients weren't leaving because Nova offered slightly better terms. They were leaving because they remembered me, the promises I had kept, the relationships I had built, the cultural bridges I had painstakingly maintained. And now, with Nova, they saw a chance to reclaim that stability without the chaos TechSphere had become. The media began to take notice. A tech industry blog ran a small piece about unexplained shifts in TechSphere's client base. Then a financial site picked up the story. Within days, the headline spread. TechSphere in trouble? Rumors of key partnerships collapsing. Stock prices wavered, then plummeted. I imagined Ethan alone in his office, staring at the crimson-red numbers on his monitors. The board's trust in him, once unshakable, was now cracking just like the company's facade. Late one night, as another report of lost revenue hit his desk, Ethan stood in the darkened room, his jaw tight, his hand clenched around a cold cup of coffee. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't issue orders. He just stood there, breathing heavily, until finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he muttered, "If she wants war, she'll have war." At that moment, I knew the shadow war was ending. The next battle wouldn't be fought in silence. It would be loud, brutal, and for everyone to see. The shadow war was over. Ethan made sure of that. 2 weeks after Nova Consulting celebrated our 5th major client win, the first blow came crashing down. I woke up to my phone buzzing relentlessly, screen lit up with notifications and headlines screaming my name alongside words like corporate theft and industrial espionage. By the time I reached the office, my team was silent, huddled around a laptop. Their pale faces told me everything before I even saw the screen. Ethan hadn't just made a move, he'd gone nuclear. TechSphere had filed a massive lawsuit against me and Nova Consulting, accusing us of stealing confidential data and poaching clients illegally. At the very same moment, a coordinated smear campaign erupted online. News articles, anonymous sources, and social media posts painted me as a backstabber who had sabotaged TechSphere for personal gain. My chest tightened as I read a particularly vicious headline. Olivia Tran, the woman who brought down TechSphere. "This is everywhere," one of my analysts whispered, voice trembling. "Some clients are already asking if they should cancel their contracts with us." I forced myself to stay calm even as my stomach churned. This wasn't just a legal attack, it was psychological warfare. Ethan wasn't trying to win in court yet. He was trying to destroy my reputation, to turn the world against me before the first hearing even began. Within days, the damage was obvious. A few newer clients froze payments. Others suspended negotiations, terrified of being caught in a public scandal. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. That evening, I walked into one of Manhattan's most feared corporate law firms. The lead attorney, Rachel Carter, listened intently as I laid everything out. When I finished, she folded her hands, eyes sharp and assessing. "Ethan has deep pockets," she warned, "and powerful friends. This fight will be ugly." I met her gaze without flinching. "I don't care how ugly it gets," I said, my voice steady. "We fight." The next morning, Ethan's office received our counterclaim. I didn't need to see his face to know it. For the first time, he realized Nova Consulting wouldn't be crushed quietly. The first hearing came faster than I'd imagined. In the days leading up to it, the pressure was suffocating. Ethan's smear campaign dominated every newsfeed. My name trended on social media, dissected by strangers who didn't know me but felt entitled to judge me. Some clients withdrew completely, terrified of being dragged into the storm. The morning of the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse staring at the sea of flashing cameras. Reporters shouted questions, their words slicing through the cold air like knives. "Olivia, did you steal from TechSphere? Is Nova Consulting collapsing under the lawsuit?" I didn't answer. Rachel walked beside me, calm and focused, whispering, "Ignore them. Eyes forward." We pushed through the crowd and into the cavernous courtroom. The marble floors gleamed, reflecting the harsh overhead lights. At the far side of the room sat Ethan, perfectly composed in his tailored suit, lips curved into that same smug smile that had haunted me since Shanghai. My chest tightened, but then I saw someone that made me stop in my tracks. In the very back row, hands folded, sat Michael Harris. My breath caught. Michael was one of TechSphere's original founders, a man whose vision had once shaped the entire company. A year ago, he'd resigned abruptly after a clash with the board and had vanished from public view. His sudden appearance here sent murmurs rippling through the room. Ethan noticed him too. For the first time, his confident mask faltered, a tiny crack of unease flashing across his face. The judge called the court to order, and the attorneys began their opening statements. My heart pounded as Rachel spoke, laying out our defense. Ethan's lawyer responded, sharp and venomous, painting me as a liar and a thief. Then, unexpectedly, Michael rose to his feet. "Your Honor," his voice rang out, calm yet commanding. "I request to be recognized as an interested party in this case." The entire courtroom froze. Even the judge seemed momentarily stunned. Ethan half rose from his seat, his composure slipping. Michael lifted a thick folder for all to see. "I have evidence," he declared, "that will change everything about this case and expose the truth about Mr. Ethan Cole." For a heartbeat, the entire courtroom was silent. Then whispers rippled through the gallery like a rising tide. Ethan's face drained of color as Michael stepped forward, his movements deliberate and unshaken. The judge's gavel struck once. "Proceed, Mr. Harris." Michael placed the thick folder on the evidence table and opened it with a crisp snap. "These," he said, his voice steady, "are contracts and financial records showing that Ethan Cole has engaged in a series of illegal side deals over the past year. Secret agreements, embezzlement schemes, and fraudulent stock manipulations designed to enrich himself while weakening TechSphere from within." A collective gasp filled the room. I stared in disbelief, my pulse thundering in my ears. This was bigger than anything I had expected. Ethan hadn't just been sabotaging me. He had been poisoning the company the entire time. Ethan jumped to his feet, shouting, "Lies! This is a desperate stunt by a bitter ex-founder!" But his voice cracked, betraying his panic. The judge's gavel slammed down again. "Mr. Cole, you will remain seated." Michael turned toward me then, his expression resolute. "Olivia," he said, loud enough for the court to hear. "I left TechSphere because I refused to be complicit in Ethan's corruption. You fought with integrity. Now it's time the world sees who he truly is." I swallowed hard, emotion tightening my throat, and gave him a single nod. By the time the session ended, the entire narrative had flipped. Reporters surged toward me, demanding comments, while Ethan stormed out surrounded by his lawyers, his once pristine image in tatters. Back in our office that night, Rachel spread the documents across the table, eyes shining with determination. "With this," she said, We can call for a special shareholders meeting to expose Ethan publicly and move to have him removed. I looked down at the papers, undeniable proof of his betrayal, and felt something I hadn't in weeks. Control. Staring out the window at the city lights, I whispered to myself, the time for defense is over. Now we take the fight to him. The boardroom was already packed when Rachel and I arrived. The air felt heavy, charged with whispers and anticipation. Cameras lined the back wall, their red recording lights blinking like watchful eyes. Members of the press sat shoulder to shoulder with TechSphere's most powerful shareholders, their expressions a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. At the center of the room, a massive screen displayed TechSphere's logo, cold and sterile against the tension hanging over us. This was no ordinary meeting. This was a public reckoning. I took my seat at the long mahogany table, hands clasped tightly in my lap. Across from me sat Ethan, perfectly composed, his suit immaculate, his smile carefully calculated. But behind that calm mask, I saw the faint twitch of his jaw, a tiny tell that gave me strength. The chairman cleared his throat. We are here today to discuss allegations brought forward regarding Mr. Ethan Cole's leadership and the recent collapse of the DragonGate partnership. His gaze swept the room before settling on me. Miss Tran, you may begin. I rose to my feet, heart pounding but voice steady. 10 months ago, I led the negotiations that would have secured TechSphere's largest international deal to date. I began. But that deal was sabotaged, not by our competitors, but from within. The screen behind me lit up with a timeline Rachel and I had spent nights perfecting. Each date, each document, each decision was laid bare. As I walked the room through the sequence of events, I could feel the shift in the air. Ethan tried to interrupt, his tone dismissive. This is nothing more than a personal vendetta. Rachel didn't even glance at him. She simply pressed a button on the remote. The screen shifted to a series of confidential emails, Ethan's signature clearly visible at the bottom. Gasps rippled through the crowd. But the final blow came when Michael Harris stepped forward. Without a word, he played an audio recording. Ethan's voice filled the room, cold and unmistakable. We'll cut Olivia out. Once DragonGate walks, the board will have no choice but to back me. Chaos erupted. Board members shouted. Reporters scrambled to capture every moment. The chairman banged his gavel, face pale with anger. Mr. Cole, step outside. The board will now deliberate on your future. Ethan rose slowly, his mask cracking, and for the first time, he looked truly afraid. The room buzzed with tension as Ethan stepped out, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. The moment the door closed behind him, the board erupted into a storm of voices. Some shouted in anger, others whispered urgently, but no one defended him anymore. His power, once absolute, had crumbled in an instant. The chairman raised his gavel, silencing the chaos. We will vote now, he declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. My breath caught as hands went up one by one, the outcome becoming clear before the final count was even tallied. When the chairman finally spoke, his voice was firm. By a unanimous decision, Mr. Ethan Cole is hereby suspended from his position effective immediately pending a full investigation. A stunned silence followed, then an audible gasp as the weight of the announcement sank in. I felt my knees weaken, not from victory, but from the sheer intensity of it all. Moments later, security opened the door. Ethan returned, flanked by 2 officers. His face was pale, his once confident smile gone. This is a mistake, he barked, his voice cracking. You can't do this to me. I built this company. The chairman didn't flinch. No, Ethan, he said coldly. You tried to destroy it. The cameras clicked furiously, capturing every second as Ethan was escorted out. That image, his fall from power, broadcast live, would dominate headlines for weeks. Reporters immediately surged forward, shouting questions at me. Rachel stepped in front of me, shielding me like a warrior, but I raised a hand, signaling that I would speak. My voice was calm, measured. Nova Consulting has acted with integrity from day one, I said. Our only goal is to build bridges and create sustainable partnerships. Today's events are proof that truth will always come to light. Flashes exploded around me as my words spread across the room. When the press conference ended, I stepped into the main lobby. The massive screen on the wall flickered, displaying breaking news. Nova Consulting shares surged 32% after TechSphere shakeup. I stood there, absorbing the moment, not with gloating or revenge, but with quiet resolve. For the first time since Shanghai, I wasn't just surviving. I was leading, and as I turned toward the exit, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter. 2 weeks after the board meeting, Nova Consulting stood at the center of a moment I once thought impossible. The grand ballroom of the Conrad Hotel gleamed under crystal chandeliers as leaders from DragonGate and Nova Consulting gathered to sign our landmark partnership. This deal wasn't just a recovery of what TechSphere had lost. It was 3 times larger, a bold step into a future we were now building together. I stood at the head of the table, pen in hand, my reflection shining on the glossy surface. As cameras flashed and journalists whispered excitedly, I glanced at Liang Wei. He gave me a small, knowing nod, a silent reminder of the night he'd handed me his card and told me to stand on my own. When the final signature was placed on the contract, applause erupted. My team, still small but fiercely loyal, beamed with pride. Rachel was there too, her arms crossed and a rare smile on her lips, a quiet acknowledgement of the battle we'd just fought and won. Across the city, TechSphere's building loomed like a relic of the past. Reports said their stock had hit record lows, with investors fleeing in droves. But I didn't think of Ethan or his downfall now. Today wasn't about revenge. It was about proving what we were capable of when we refused to break. As I addressed the crowd, I felt the weight of the last 10 months lift from my shoulders. This partnership, I said, my voice clear and steady, isn't just about business. It's about rebuilding trust, forging new paths, and showing that integrity can triumph over deceit. The applause rose again, warm and genuine. In that moment, Nova Consulting wasn't just a company. It was a promise of something greater. Later that night, when the cameras were gone and the ballroom stood empty, I slipped away to Nova Consulting's modest office. It felt almost surreal, walking past the same desks where just weeks ago we'd worked in fear and uncertainty. Now, those same halls buzzed with quiet confidence. I stood by the window, gazing out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Ethan was watching his empire crumble. A small part of me had once longed to see him suffer as I had, but now, standing on the other side of this storm, I realized this wasn't about revenge. It was about rebirth. I thought of Liang Wei, who had trusted me when no one else would. Of Rachel, who had fought beside me when the world tried to silence me. Of Michael Harris, who'd risked everything to expose the truth. And of my team, the handful of people who had believed in Nova before anyone else dared to. Their faith had carried me through the darkest nights, when defeat seemed inevitable and hope felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. As dawn began to break, I walked to the small plaque on our door. Nova Consulting. I ran my fingers over the letters, remembering the woman I had been when this began. Afraid, humiliated, standing alone in a Shanghai boardroom as everything fell apart. Now, I wasn't that woman anymore. Turning back to my team, who were gathering for the morning's first meeting, I smiled. "We've proven that no betrayal is final," I said softly. "What matters is how we rise after we fall." And as the first rays of sunlight touched the city skyline, I knew this was only the beginning of a story far greater than my own.